Yes.
I saw you at Stampede a couple years back, and you said that you were trying to get back to the roots of blues, and how it went way back to Ireland, or was it Scottish or Irish music?
Scotland, mainly. The blues comes from Scotland. Of course, everybody knows this, but.
So, can you elaborate?
Could I elaborate on why the blues comes from Scotland?
And how you go back and get.
Wow. Okay. It does. The form. Blues music has a form, like a structure, the 12-bar kind of blues structure of singing one line twice and then the last line once. That is based on a folk music tradition of the British Isles, mainly like Scotland and northern Scotland, even farther from England. The same guy, the Lomaxes, the same guys that recorded stuff for the U.S. Library of Congress all through the 1930s, searching what they weren't searching for blues guys. They were searching for ancient British folk songs that they'd only seen the texts to, because in the 1400s or in the 1100s, even further back, they were lucky to find written transcripts of these folk songs, but no one had any idea what they sounded like. It was a very long-standing tradition of these songs, and in England, of course, time marched forward from 1100 onward, and so you don't really get a sense of what those songs originally sounded like because they change every generation. So they went looking for the origins of British folk music. Of course, they went like Newfoundland, Barbados, Scotland, Georgia, Texas, anywhere they could find pockets of early British influence. Now in America and in the West Indies, obviously they're looking at former slaves or the offspring of slaves, people who lived in an isolated society where modern times didn't really catch up with their culture, and so the songs they were singing were from probably remained largely unchanged for 100 or so years more prior to recorded data. It's getting very complicated. But anybody that credits the blues, gives Africa credit for the blues. I mean, you can credit Africans in North America and the Caribbean for preserving a form of music that is not African. It's Scottish in origin. Because it's also fairly well known that, Africans brought as slaves were stripped of religion, language, even their family units, all forms of their culture. They were not allowed to play drums because they could communicate that way. To prevent uprisings, they weren't allowed to play drums. Why? If you're a slave owner, McAllister, why would you let your slaves sing African music? They didn't. They had to sing music that would please their masters. So they played and sang with, like, fiddles and banjos and guitars and mandolins, Western European, or there's some Spanish influence up from the southern border up through Mexico, 12-string guitars and things like this. Symphonic instruments and marching band instruments like trumpets and saxophones, and jazz comes from New Orleans because all the military, after the Spanish War, all the marching bands for the U.S. Army, they just left their stuff at the port of New Orleans and everybody went home. So all these cheap instruments were around, so you get a lot of that in jazz. So it requires a little bit of a, it's fairly romantic to think that, wow, Robert Johnson made a deal with the devil in the crossroads. Wow, it's this African-American thing. It's not really, because there are songs from 1100 where a knight, a guy who's going to fight in the Crusades, meets the devil at a crossroads on his way to the Crusades, and the devil tries to make a deal for his soul, which, of course, the knight, being very righteous, doesn't agree to make the deal with the devil. Meeting a devil at the crossroads kind of goes back prior to 1932. It goes back to 1100. So Scotland wins. That's it. That's my point. Does that make sense to anybody else but me? Sorry.
There's a great movie called The Song Catcher.
Oh yeah, I heard about that.
It looks more at the British folk connection of the Appalachians, but it sort of traces the same story you just told about. It's called Songcatcher if anybody wants to see it.
But all that, even anybody know anything about Robert Johnson? You guys heard of Robert Johnson, right? But all the stories about how he died at a young age, maybe he was poisoned by a jealous lover. Even the poisoned by a jealous lover story goes back into the folklore of the 1100s. we have a song on our second record called A Cup of Cold Poison, which, I mean, wow, dude gets poisoned by his wife, catches him cheating and she poisons him. Yeah, but that's based on a song called Lord Thomas, which goes back to, you know, prehistory for folk music. It has nothing to do with Robert Johnson or anybody else who supposedly got poisoned. And that's not that unique of a tactic either, I'm sure. It probably goes back earlier than that. So, you want to hear that one?
Sure.
A poisoning song. Okay, let's hear it.
One of the new ones coming out.
Yeah, I can play. So I'll play some new ones too. Play some old ones.